A new phase in the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The breakdown starts now. Good evening and welcome to the breakdown. I'm Tara Setmayer. This is the Rick Wilson, and we have a good show for you tonight on a number of levels, because we're going to talk a little domestic politics and we're going to talk a little Ukraine. We have an excellent guest, war reporter Michael Weiss is with us, and if you don't follow him, you should follow him on Twitter. I know his work from ISIS, and he's done extraordinary work on ISIS, and I had no idea that he did this kind of work in Russia and Ukraine, and he is just fresh back from being on the ground in Ukraine and has extraordinary insights into what's going on. So we are fortunate enough to have him with us tonight in a few minutes. So stay tuned for Michael Weiss. But first, Rick, before I get into the show, tragedy strikes Brooklyn today. It's still developing. Right. We don't know what the motivation is, but when you have a mass shooting attack, we have unexploded incendiary devices, very unsettling. And I want to extend my heartfelt prayers and thoughts to the folks in Brooklyn. And it's just never a good day when that's the headline.
Well, it is one of these attacks. We don't know the whole outline of it yet. And as a friend of mine just said to me, he said, you know, it's a strange world we live in where the best case scenario is it's going to be somebody who has got a serious mental illness, where that's the best case scenario.
Right. And it's, you know, we've seen this too many times. And, you know, I often say that it's remarkable that in such an open society that we have, that more soft targets like this aren't hit. And I've been grateful to see that hasn't happened more often. Right. And when it does, it's still shocking. And it is. I know that our law enforcement agencies will get to the bottom of this. New York City has
the NYPD is actually pretty good at what they do when it comes to that sort of scale thing. And the anti-terrorism units that were beefed up after 9/11 will obviously be brought into bear on this, as will the FBI and other federal law enforcement.
Absolutely, so whether it's foreign or domestic, hopefully we'll
get this clarified sooner than later.
Indeed. Switching gears, there's been a lot of very interesting dynamics going on in MAGA world that we just sit back and do the popcorn. Where's the popcorn meme? And watch what's going on. But it does have significant political implications, I think, going into the midterms, watching how this all plays out.
Sure.
But I think because it's Tuesday, what does that mean,
Oh, yes.
Rick?
Why, it's last week in the Republican Party Day.
Indeed it is. And we have some summaries of what's been going on in MAGA world, included in all the other insanity happening on the Republican side. Roll it.
What are you excited for?
I'm the secret body.
Trump.
I know you're having a great time at the Kid Rock concert tonight.
If you're a senator and you're voting to approve Ketanji Brown Jackson, then you are pro-pedophile.
Judge Brown is a pedophile apologist.
You know, the last Judge Jackson left the Supreme Court to go to Nuremberg and prosecute the case against the Nazis. This Judge Jackson might have gone there to defend them.
Disney wants to completely take your children and they want to indoctrinate them into sexual immoral filth.
Do you see Minnie in a dress, or do you see Mickey holding a penis?
Herschel Walker, the leading GOP candidate in the vital Senate race in Georgia. You endorsed him, yet his ex-wife says he pointed a pistol at her head and said, "I'm going to blow your effing brains out."
Almost every candidate's had troubled periods.
You got to remember that the song Michael Jackson said, "The Man in the Mirror." You got to look at yourself and see what's going on. You know, this country is this is one of the most environmental drilling countries in the world, but yet we're walking on all the resources we have underneath our feet.
Make it stop. It's awful.
If I think I'm the most honest human being, perhaps, that God ever created.
I'm kind of confused why they're telling us to stand with Ukraine when it seems that everybody affiliated or standing with Ukraine is either a transgender, Satanist, or a straight-up Nazi.
Texas is providing charter buses to send
these illegal immigrants who have been dropped off by the Biden administration to Washington, D.C.
One of the first January 6 trials ended in an extortion.
I'm Ron Hanks, and I'm running for the United States Senate. I'm Ron Hanks, and I approve this message.
Okay.
It really never gets any better, does it?
It just doesn't. It doesn't. And I think that every week as we get closer to actually casting votes in the midterm election, whether it's primary votes or in the general election, I really hope that people forward our last week in the Republican Party to all of their friends.
To their MAGAs. To
the people on the fence who go, well, we haven't gotten a child tax credit, so we're going to vote the Republicans in instead. For the hell with the Democrats. Really?
You're going to get a tax increase if you vote the Republicans in this time.
Right, because now apparently middle-class tax increases are part of the
they just don't have enough skin in the game.
I mean, I can't. So I hope that these are having an impact on folks. I mean, we laugh at the absurdity, but these people are either in power or are seeking power, and we cannot let that happen. Are we going to cede the country to these loons? We're this close, folks. This close. Midterms matter. Yep. Anyway, I want to drill down on a couple things that we just saw. Herschel Walker. This guy is an absolute disgrace. He's a domestic abuser.
He's a train wreck.
Dumb as a brick. He clearly is not wired up too tight. Maybe he suffers from injuries from football, the CTE brain injury. Maybe, I don't know. I'm not a doctor. But this guy is not wired up too tight and has a violent, disturbing past against women and police. Yeah. And Mitch freaking McConnell sits there and says, well, everybody's had a troubled period in their lives. Troubled period is you miss your taxes. Maybe you get back on your, you missed your couple tax payments and you got to pay back taxes. A troubled period is you went bankrupt. A troubled period is you had a nasty divorce. Not threatening to shoot your girlfriend or your wife and threatening them and playing Russian roulette and threatening police officers and saying you're going to blow your fucking brains out. That's not a trouble period, Mitch McConnell. What are you doing?
Here's the great thing about this weird irony that they're in. They are desperate to keep Republican turnout in Georgia up because they know that Warnock is a high hill to climb. They see Stacey Abrams coming on. And so Mitch McConnell, who, by the way, folks, you should know this, 7 or 8 months ago when Herschel Walker was getting into this race, Mitch McConnell's people, Josh Holmes and all the rest of them, were dumping every bit of opposition research on Herschel Walker they could find. Mm-hmm. They were nuking this guy in the press constantly. All the stories that came out about Herschel Walker before the last month and a half, 2 months.
Yeah, over the summer.
We're all from Mitch McConnell and the Senate committee. They were desperate to get him out of this race. They did not want him in this race. And so now watching McConnell squirm like an eel caught in a trap on that stage, we've all had trouble. You know what? I've had trouble in my life. You've had trouble in your life. You ever put a gun to your spouse's head? No, you have not.
Correct.
You ever
I've never played Russian roulette.
No, you have not. Played Russian roulette? Nope, not at all.
Because that's not what a well-adjusted adult does when they're in a stressful situation. This guy's not a well-adjusted adult.
This guy has legitimate mental problems.
He does, and I hope he gets help, but he doesn't need to be anywhere near the Senate getting paid by American taxpayers. Right. Georgia, do better. Now, Mitch McConnell, that wasn't the only thing he said. Shout out to Jonathan Swan for an excellent
brilliant interview. Absolutely brilliant interview.
He is the best. And we saw what he did with Trump. It turned into lots of memes.
I'd rather gnaw off a limb than do a hostile interview with Jonathan Swan.
Yes, he's fantastic. But we also took notice of something else Mitch McConnell said during this interview, where Jonathan pushed him on how he gave this extraordinary January 6th speech after January 6th happened, which I'd give McConnell credit, one of the best Senate speeches of his career. Yep. And then turns around and endorses Trump, I'll vote for him again if he runs in 2024.
Of course I'll vote for him again, Tara, because I don't have any other options. It's either Trump or the gay pedophile alien caravan sex fiends.
That is a really good impression, Rick. Have you been working on that? I need a little more. It just seems neck.
It just seems. I gotta add even more weight so I can really get the whole.
You need a little more turkey lurkey neck.
I find it disturbing, Tara, that
At a central
All right,
casting.
folks, one night I'm going to do the whole show in Mitch McConnell.
Oh God, please don't.
One night.
Please
one
don't.
night. We'll figure it out when, but I commit to you that one night I'm going to do either that or I can do the whole show in various political leader accents.
I like that idea, but there will be beverages of the adult nature involved if that happens.
Tara, that's the kind of thing where you need a little bit of wine just beforehand. Everybody gets to loosen up a little bit.
Oh my gosh, we've started something here. We started something. But Rick, you were making the point about Mitch McConnell, and I was saying how Jonathan Swan was able to extract another aspect of Mitch McConnell's just absolute duplicitousness here, where he talked about how, why would you still, after everything you said about Donald Trump, what you know to be true, let's be honest, would you still say you would endorse him in 2024? And the bottom line was party over country. Bottom line. And Lincoln Project that's right. And Lincoln Project had something to say about it. I think we have the ad.
January 6th was a disgrace. Fellow Americans beat and bloodied our own police. They stormed the Senate floor. They tried to hunt down the Speaker of the House. They built a gallows and chanted about murdering the Vice President. They did this because they'd been fed wild falsehoods by the most powerful man on earth. Because he was angry he'd lost an election. Former President Trump's actions preceded the riot for a disgraceful dereliction of duty.
If the president was the party's nominee, would you support him?
The nominee of the party? Absolutely.
Liz Cheney, who has the same view of you as of January 6th, she said she doesn't want Donald Trump anywhere near the White House, and she's going to work to not make that happen because she thinks that there are some things more important than party loyalty.
Well, maybe you ought to be talking to Liz Cheney.
I really, it's not a gotcha. I'm just actually trying to understand, is there any threshold for you of what someone can do on a moral level?
I say many things I'm sure people don't understand.
Where do you draw your moral red lines?
There you have it.
And that really does illustrate it, Tara. And it's one of the reasons, this afternoon before we filmed for this evening, there were some stories breaking that, Washington Republicans behind closed doors, they mock Trump. They call him a clown, a child, a baby.
And water's wet.
We saw back in 2015. And they will all bend the knee. And what you saw was that as much as Mitch McConnell goes to corporate America and says, hey, you need me to pass your tax cuts and to take care of your regulatory problems and to deal with stuff for Wall Street and to deal with stuff for the financial services industry and the real estate firms and all the things that are the big donor-centric items in the Republican Senate fundraising effort. What really is going to happen for all you corporate Americans who are out there pouring money into Mitch's pockets and to Josh Holmes' pockets, they're going to bend the knee to Trump. They're going to support him running for president again. They're going to follow his agenda, not the agenda you think they're going to follow, because they do not have control of the Republican Party. Trump has control of them. And Mitch McConnell, for all his bluster behind closed doors, is just like the rest of them. He bends the knee in public, but you can't get away with that in this country anymore. You can't say, yeah, Trump's crazy, but we will do what we want, because you can't do what you want.
And they saw what happens. They saw what happened the last time they thought they could control him. Did they not learn?
I mean, that speech he gave on January or February 14th or 13th, whatever it was, that was the real truth.
Yes.
He spoke the truth.
He did.
But he is willing to overlook someone who sent people down to the Capitol to storm the Senate chamber and seek out Mike Pence to hang him.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's actually a good transition. Well, before I transition into it, because I have to get this out because people have been dying to know. But the other part about Trump and what's happening in MAGA world are these endorsements, right? To your point. And what happened in Pennsylvania has MAGA world freaking out.
They're not in a good spot.
They are not happy that Donald Trump decided to endorse Dr. Oz instead of the more palatable candidate, McCormick, who is Trump with more money.
Big loss for Mitch McConnell's team, by the way.
Huge, because Pennsylvania is really, really important to them.
And they're
going to
have to spend a ton of money now in that race.
Shit ton of money now. And there's questions about, well, why would Trump do this? Well, I have a theory, Rick.
Tell me.
And I think it's because of a couple things. A, you have the TV celebrity aspect of it. So,
that's a big one.
That's big for Trump. But what's not big for Trump is his bank account. And McCormick has a much larger pool of money than Donald Trump does. And I think that there was a certain amount of, there was a dick swinging contest here. And McCormick has a bigger one in the form of more money. And he's more financially sound than Trump. And that bothers Trump's ego. So to the dismay of what's politically appropriate, what makes sense politically for them. So they have to deal with Donald Trump being a wild card here, deciding to make these random endorsements that cuts into the strategy of what makes sense for Republicans to take back Congress. Good, Trump. Keep endorsing the frauds.
Churn it, Don.
Birds of a fraud feather fly together.
Yes.
And lastly, as we transition into Michael Weiss, you brought up the point about January 6th and what happened there and who Trump sent. Well, Fiona Hill, Dr. Fiona Hill, who we all remember from the first impeachment and her amazing, glorious accent. We had the opportunity to interview her. I think it was on a show you were traveling, Rick. I think
I was, yeah.
The opportunity to interview her and talk about her book. You should get it. It's amazing. But she made comments. She made some headlines the last couple of days about Trump because obviously she's an expert on Russian affairs and Ukraine. And she actually said that Trump pulled a Putin on January 6th. Yes. That was Trump pulling a Putin. That is chilling to me. And it should be chilling to more Americans that we are comparing an American president's behavior to a butcher, autocratic, tyrannical war criminal in the same sentence. And this is who the Republican Party is still beholden to.
Completely.
What are we doing here? Let's bring in Michael Weiss. Let's talk a little bit more about Ukraine and Putin. Don't want to talk about Trump because he's the worst, and we don't want to talk about that. We want to talk about your extraordinary experience and reporting coming out of Ukraine while you were there. And for those who don't know you or unfamiliar, you're an investigative journalist, and you've covered wars in Syria and now Ukraine. And you've published widely on Russian espionage and disinformation. You have a new book coming out on that soon about the GRU. But your first book, which is how I became familiar with you, was ISIS Inside the Army of Terror, which was a New York Times bestseller and named one of the top 10 books on terrorism by the Wall Street Journal. So Michael Weiss, thrilled to have you. Welcome.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Great to see you guys.
So as I teased in the beginning of the show, we seem to see a new phase now happening in Ukraine. There was a lull for a little bit, but those of us who've been paying attention knew that was just Putin recalibrating, and now they are focused on this onslaught in eastern Ukraine. Talk a little bit about what your thoughts are on where we are with Ukraine and what you saw on the ground.
Yeah, so I mean, the Russians will say that this was all part of their grand strategic design to just apply military pressure to Kyiv Oblast in order to divert resources there for their attempt to now create this kind of horseshoe occupation of eastern Ukraine, beginning, well, not really in Kharkiv, but south of Kharkiv, but the occupied territories of the Donbass, expanding those areas, and then also creating the so-called land bridge, which would connect occupied Crimea to the Russian Federation territory. So there's a siege on Mariupol, which looks like it will likely fall to Russia within days, if not. Then again, I mean, we shouldn't underestimate the resiliency of the Ukrainian defenders there. But anyway, so Putin has dialed down rather dramatically what he's looking to accomplish in this war of conquest, really, is the only way to describe it, if not a war of annihilation. So, I just got back from Ukraine. I was in Lviv, I was in Kyiv, the city, and also in a town called Borodenka, which everybody now knows those notorious images out of Bucha, summary executions, corpses lining the streets as the Ukrainians poured back in. There are many of the young military-age males, hands tied behind their back, gunshot wounds to the head. The New York Times has done an extraordinary, painstaking investigation into war crimes that have been committed in Bucha, including gang raping women, disappearing locals, execution of civilians, you name it, they've done it. In Borodenka, it's a bit different. So Borodenka is about, I think, 40 to 50 kilometers northeast of Kyiv. It was one of the first towns taken by Russia, or I should say attacked by Russia on February 24th, because it's quite close to the Belarusian border. It's on the main axis of the Russian advance toward Kyiv. There were no corpses lining the streets, but Borodenka, it's important to emphasize, has no real military infrastructure. Everything that was hit in that town was civilian. There was a telecom office completely burnt out, police station attacked, local homes. And to get there, you have to take kind of winding roads because some of the main highways are interdicted. The Russians blew up the main bridge that would connect the main artery to get to Borodenka, which is a commuter town. A lot of people who work in Kyiv live there. But then you go down a street which is called Center Street. Actually used to be called Lenin Street up until recently, ironically enough. And there are a succession of apartment blocks that have been, I mean, you can see through them in the center. And what happened is on March 1st, Russian warplanes started rocketing the apartment buildings. So this followed a kind of characteristic that we've seen in the Russian way of war. Territorial defense units in Borodenka had resisted the Russian onslaught and done so successfully. They bombed a Russian convoy. When the Russians struggle or fail militarily against another army, they like to take out their anger and their spleen on the civilian population. So they targeted this apartment block. There was no other way to put it because they hit it twice. They hit other buildings as well. And the reason that you're not seeing many corpses on the street, according to the Ukraine Emergency Service, is because they're buried under tons and tons of steel and concrete under the rubble. When I was there, the emergency services were using construction vehicles to lift whole slabs of concrete up. And they admitted to me that this was a campaign to look for dead bodies. They found, I think, about 30 so far. There are officially 200 still missing. Yesterday, I'm home now in New York. I interviewed Ukraine's prosecutor general, who told me that it's very likely that the butcher's bill in Borodenka will eclipse that of Bucha.
Oh my gosh.
So the thing to remember is the civilians were buried within seconds of being murdered because, again, entire buildings fell on top of them.
I saw some photos from Ilya Ponomarenko today, who was showing the earth-moving equipment in Borodenka. I mean, it is. You're absolutely correct. This is what the Russian army does when it is angry and when they failed. So I wanted to ask you quickly that there was a big piece of news out of Ukraine today, the capture of Viktor Medvedkov. Can you tell us what that means in the course of this whole thing? Because I think that is a story that most folks haven't processed yet, like how big he is a deal related to Putin.
Yeah, no, I mean, he is he's technically, he was a member of the Rada, Ukraine's parliament, and a quote unquote opposition figure. But, let's cut the shit. I mean, this is one of Russia's chief influence peddlers inside Ukraine. He is not just a crony of Vladimir Putin. He is thought to be one of Putin's main quote unquote wallets, which is to say a guy who does his investments around the world, particularly in Europe, and gets whatever stake in a company, usually oil and gas, and keeps it in reserve for the president of Russia. Putin is the godfather to Medvedchuk's youngest daughter. He's a malign actor, and he was captured in a special operation conducted by the SBU, which is Ukraine's domestic security service, the details of which we simply don't know yet, but this is a massive, massive coup for the Ukrainian government. Again, if it's true that this guy holds money in reserve for Putin, the secrets he has to tell, not just the Ukrainians, but the FBI and the Americans and allied nations, and they're going after oligarchic yachts and properties and looking now to target Putin's vast personal fortune, which is thought to be the largest in Europe. These secrets could be quite extraordinary.
Wasn't he I had read some speculation early on when they thought Ukraine would fall in a matter of days that he would be the stooge. He'd be the puppet, the Russian puppet to replace.
If not the public face, then certainly the guy behind the gun. Yeah, I mean, as I say, I mean, he's a Russian agent of influence. Is a kind of grab bag term that encompasses a whole sort of area of connivance. But he's something more than that. I mean, he is a full-on agent.
Yeah, for sure.
And people like that are, I think, key to the propaganda and the misinformation and disinformation campaigns that we see going on. I mean, Russia's still running around trying to say that, now accusing the UK of the false flag operation, that this is all fake. Those aren't real bodies. This isn't really happening. I mean, it's almost laughable if it wasn't so sick and twisted, but this is what they're doing. And you've done a lot of reporting on disinformation and the spread of propaganda. What have you seen in this effort by the Russians to try to convince the world this isn't happening? What is it similar? Is it different? It feels antiquated to me, but you are more of an expert on it.
Well, look, the good news is at the international level, Russia has catastrophically lost the information campaign. I was talking to my friend Andrei Soldatov, who is a Russian investigative journalist and a specialist in the security services and kind of a mentor to me on understanding everything from the FSB to the GRU. And he told me that a source inside the GRU, Russia's military intelligence service, admitted to him that they have failed, that they were trying to essentially dupe the world into thinking Russia was forced into this campaign. It was a completely defensive in nature, et cetera, and nobody's really buying that stuff. The problem, though, is that inside Russia, unfortunately, quite a lot of people are buying that. There have been ample instances of Ukrainians with family members in Russia calling them to say, look at the atrocities your military has committed on our soil. And the Russians are saying, no, these are fakes. These are staged by the CIA. All this is just theater. It's not really happening. I mean, really, kind of, we're dealing with a neo-totalitarian state now. And a
sounds
society,
like January 6th. Here.
Well, I mean, yes, in a matter of speaking, it is.
Right.
I'm always reluctant to traffic in moral equivalency, but the last 7 years or so have really kind of battered that reluctance. I mean, the stuff you guys were just playing on this show. And, the other important thing I have to tell you, I go away from the United States, I come back and I hear, stories like, Disney is grooming pedophiles and just Kyiv is sort of the capital of the West now. It is the center of the free world, as far as I'm concerned. And I'm always reminded that Onion article right after 9/11, battered or traumatized nation longs to care about meaningless shit. This is kind of what everybody is dealing with outside of Ukraine. I mean, Ukraine is fighting a war of existential necessity against an overpowering adversary that they've managed to quite deftly outfox and outmarshal so far. And nobody in Ukraine is talking about meaningless shit. Nobody in Ukraine has time for nonsense about cancel culture and the latest kind of cultural grievance venting that seems to kind of dominate the headlines here. I mean, the Oscars for about 48 hours, I was getting heart palpitations, not because I care about what's happening in Hollywood, because I knew that was going to take the spotlight off of this war, and it is.
But your point that it's sort of the capital of the West, it is the moral center of the free world right now, by any standard, I think. And
correct.
And it is the luxury good of political outrage in America. You can see a lot of people on the left and the right, to be perfectly frank, would love to get back to their usual ideological scrapping.
Mm-hmm. And look, they're welcome to. I mean, I'm not saying that anybody has any kind of moral imperative to care about a conflict far away. But from my point of view, as somebody who studies international affairs and grand strategy, what happens in Ukraine is not going to stay in Ukraine. I mean, it has already affected the geopolitical landscape of Europe.
Yes.
The refugee flows. We saw that in the case of ISIS and the Syrian civil war. The migration crisis, the worst since World War II, absolutely changed the political landscape of several countries in Europe.
Germany in particular. Certainly
arguably contributed to America's domestic political situation and the rise of this kind of neo-populist Trumpian politics here in terms of xenophobia, anti-Muslim bigotry, et cetera, et cetera. So this is not going to stay confined to the borders of Ukraine, and it already hasn't done. So I would argue it behooves Americans to pay attention. I know we have limited attention spans, and I forget what the average sort of length of time is. 6 weeks into a war, people start switching off and start looking elsewhere for the next kind of distraction or bit of stimulation, which is where we essentially are now. Yeah.
And it's hard for Americans to see a war that isn't the digital image of laser guided bombs dropping through a rooftop somewhere.
Right.
And the cadence of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan was so slow in comparison to what's happening now.
Right.
When you consider that the Russians lost 14 or 15,000 men in Afghanistan in in a
10 years,
10-year window.
Yeah,
and
they've lost more than that now.
Yeah, they've lost 20,000 plus or whatever the number is.
Right.
Which, the cadence and the speed of this war is, I think, making it very difficult for people to keep up with it in some strange ways.
Michael, we have like a minute left, and I wanted to get your take on 2 quick things. The chemical weapons rumors that we're hearing. Is this a red line? Because I know that people have felt that the United States hasn't done enough, even though we've been doing a lot behind the scenes. But does that change the calculus? And what do you think it'll take for Putin to back off? What does defeat look like, or what does victory look like for Ukraine?
Well, first of all, the chemical weapons allegation hasn't been confirmed, and it's important to emphasize President Zelensky has not come out and said this. I just saw Anthony Blinken say we cannot confirm it, nor do we think the Ukrainians have been able to do so. So I would just put a big asterisk there.
Yeah.
In terms of if WMD does get used in Ukraine, is that going to alter the American calculation? I mean, I'd like to say yes, it will trigger some international, at least an intervention to try and rescue the people who are the victims of this. I don't think that's going to happen, unfortunately. And I think if these weapons are used, it's going to be done under such a cloud of war that it's going to be impossible to actually attribute culpability, even though we'll all know who's really culpable, and also the actual substance, right? There is a difference between chlorine, say, and sarin gas and the rest.
Right.
In terms of what does defeat look like, it looks like defeat. Military defeat for Putin would be a catastrophic blow to the Kremlin and its grand designs. I think it would be a boon for the West and certainly for Ukraine. And the fact that this country, which has been struggling to join NATO and is not going to be able to join NATO, will have been able to do what NATO was founded to do, but not as a matter of collective security, as a matter of individual security, is an almost breathtaking accomplishment, right?
It is.
And they will join the European Union before long. And to be honest with you, I think that matters more to them in terms of the political, economic, and social integration that will bring. They've already done what essentially they would want Article 5 to do on their behalf, and they've done it almost single-handedly. Plenty of indirect support, but no direct support.
One last thing before we go. Obviously, Putin thinks of a win condition of having, his little breakaway mini republics in the West. What do you think the future of Crimea looks like in the case of a significant I'm old, sorry, Russian defeat here? Because I think that's
the question
something
is, they have already deployed forces that were stationed in occupied Crimea at the start of the war.
Right.
If the Ukrainians can really bring the fight to them in Donbass and really bring the fight to them, I mean, they're in, trying to make encroachments into Kherson, which is the only major population center that had, quote unquote, fallen to the Russians, even though the population there has been quite restive and resisting that occupation. There's always a chance the Ukrainians could actually retake territory they lost in 2014. And that's a contingency that is a direct result of Putin going all in here, right? These lines of contact had been maintained for 8 years. There'd been kind of on and off escalations, de-escalations. But by and large, Putin had Crimea and he had Lugansk and Donetsk, good chunks of those areas under the so-called People's Republics.
Right.
He might lose, if not everything, then more than he went into this thing with. Yeah.
Well, Michael, thank you so much. We could spend way more time on this, and I wish we had more time to do this. But thank you so much for your work.
Sure.
Are you headed back over at any point soon? Are you?
Well, if my wife has anything to say about it, I'm staying put for a while. I didn't tell her I was going to Kyiv. She only knew Lviv, so I asked forgiveness, not permission.
There you go.
Well, I look forward to your upcoming book, The Glass House: How Russia's Military Intelligence Agency, the GRU, Changed the World. When is that coming out?
It was meant to come out already, but the world has a way of changing me and my publishing schedule. So
there it
next
is.
year, it seems like, yeah.
Well, I think you're going to have some considerably more robust chapters in that now after what's gone on. And I look forward to reading it from you and following you on Twitter. Michael Weiss.
Michael D. Weiss on Twitter,
Thank you.
folks. Thanks, Michael.
Guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Incredible work. Incredible work.
Amazing.
We didn't get a chance to talk to him about the Free Russia Foundation, which he sits on the board of, which is another incredible international organization that works on supporting civil society and democratic development in Russia. And they, we need more of that given what's happening now. Well, that is it for this week's edition of The Breakdown. Be sure to check out our sister show tomorrow. We're speaking on Wednesday, and we will see you guys back here on Thursday.
Thanks, everybody.